Hello and welcome back to the Nutrition and Life podcast. My name is Lisa, I'm your host, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with coach, trainer, and co-founder of the Paragon training methods and evolved training systems, Bryan Boorstein. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
Awesome. Well, I would love for us to just start off with a little bit of an introduction into who is Bryan, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I've been training with weights, doing this fitness thing for almost 27 years now, which is crazy. Didn't think I would ever be here. But I started when I was 15 years old, wanted to get bigger and stronger for basketball, maybe to impress girls, a whole slew of reasons. Started training with weights. I was initially involved in the internet just started back then. It was 1997. So there were these message boards where people would exchange information on training, um, kind of like Facebook groups today or something along those lines. But I stumbled into a group that was filled with people that we're very stuck on this idea of old school training, before the steroid era. What did people do before steroids were a thing? And you have to look all the way back to like the 1950s to really see that type of training. And most of that training was 2 to 3 times a week, full body, or like upper lower splits, maybe like upper Monday, Wednesday lower, Friday upper, and then repeat the opposite way the following week. So lower, upper, lower. But basically, it was these low volume approaches, big compound movements, lots of recovery, no focus on how much volume can I do or any of the big issues that we now seem to be inundated with in the industry. And it was a really great way to get started for me. Much better than having opened up a Muscle and Fitness magazine with like, got to do this training program where there's 30 sets of chest and 30 sets of back and, whatever craziness is out there. So I feel very lucky in that way. Got obsessed with training basically along with basketball throughout high school. Wasn't quite good enough to play basketball at a college level. So really doubled down on the training thing, majored in exercise physiology and sports management. Really wanted to go into training related endeavors after college, but at the time in 2005, 2006, there just wasn't a lot of opportunity there for somebody with that degree like there is now, or at least it seems like there's a more clear path now. Back then, it was you could be an assistant strength coach at a university and make $30,000 a year or something along those lines. And so I did not go into training initially out of college. I spent 3 or 4 years working in a corporate government job until 2010. My college roommate, a guy named Anders Varner, he co-hosts the Barbell Shrugged podcast. We were college roommates. And so he moved out to San Diego and we decided to start a CrossFit gym together. CrossFit was great, amazing, best way to get me into like a fitness-based profession, so to speak. Uh, we went our separate ways and sold the gym in 2016. I took all of my business online. So I started a number of group programs. That's when Evolve Training Systems was started. We offered this really cool transition program that was what I was going through at the time. It was this guy who was obsessed with CrossFit, and my whole identity was tied in CrossFit. So I needed to still be able to like muscle up and snatch and clean and jerk and do these things. But I also needed to let my body heal and focus on aesthetics and have a little bit less intensity. And so the original evolved programs were based around that model of combining some of these features together into one program. And then that was so successful in the first year that Lori, who's my business partner at Paragon, she proposed that we partner up and create a similar program for her audience, which was more female based than my audience. And Paragon was born, as you see this cool hoodie that I'm wearing for anyone watching on the YouTubes. And we've been doing that now since 2018. And I've changed a bit. Like I've picked up cardio, and I know that that's something we'll talk about as we get into the show. So that's kind of where I sit at the moment in 2024.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for providing this background, and even for me, that's some new information also, and interesting to hear how you got into collaborating with Lori, because that's how I found you. So I too have a CrossFit background, got injured, was looking for alternative training methods. And what spoke to me on Lori's program was that she was precisely doing all these things, as you mentioned, using dumbbell snatches and all these things still, or still promoting, hey, we're still going to incorporate some pull-ups and all these fun things that you kind of crave and miss when you
Mhm.
the CrossFit scene. But I also had to let my body heal, and nowadays I just train at a gym and more aesthetic sort of focus in terms of training. But yeah, really interesting to hear. So I think it was 2018 when I did some of the Paragon programs. I don't remember exactly which one that was. I don't even know if you guys still have the same ones up there as back then. But I really, really enjoyed it. I think it was a wonderful transition for me because just like you, my identity was tied into CrossFit. You know, that's who you are. And like so many people, you struggle letting go of that. I need to feel exhausted at the end of my workout. I need to do a nice Metcon at the end of my hour or whatever.
Mhm.
So just the thought of going into a pure bodybuilding program right away was so mind-numbingly boring to me.
Yeah, I totally understand. I mean, I felt the same way. As far as the program you followed, so at the time in 2018, we only offered one program, which
Right.
was our like original program, it was like the OG Paragon program. That program now has been rebranded to be called our Strength Metcon program. And so we still offer that, but the majority of what we offer is in the more physique space. So of our 13 or 15 programs that we have available, I'd say 11 of them are more pure physique based. And then there's like, the Strength Metcon program and a program called Quickie, which is kind of like a quicker, shortened version of that with dumbbells.
Awesome. Well, I would love for you to actually explain a little bit to the audience why it can be important for some people to shift to a bit more of a lower intensity program, a bit more of a physique focused
Mhm.
program. Why we might want to do that if we're feeling stuck in our training, or yeah, just in general, what the differences perhaps are as well.
Yeah, the differences as far as how your physique is going to look is really only going to be affected at the highest level. Meaning if you can get to like 98% of your physique goals likely by doing a higher intensity CrossFit style program. It's when you're maybe 95%, something like that. It's when you're trying to be elite at anything, you have to dial in the specificity of that endeavor a little bit more. And so for anybody that's looking to like they feel like their physique is stuck, then maybe changing to a more physique focused program is going to be the right ticket. And the reason being is that you're just able to do so much more productive volume. When you're doing a program like a CrossFit style or one of those functional fitness programs, a lot of the movements exhaust you physically, like systemically, your body feels tired. All of your muscles feel worked. So you have this illusion that I trained my shoulders to failure and I trained my legs to failure and I trained my back to failure and you trained all of these different muscles to failure. But because the actual prescription of CrossFit, it asks you to use your entire body to create a task. So you're not doing a strict pull up that's targeting your biceps and your lats and your upper back. You're doing a kipping pull up where the majority of the momentum is actually coming from your hips, your glutes, and your abs. So now you're taking a movement that's supposed to target certain muscles, but it's being assisted by other muscles. We see the same thing with the Olympic lifting. Like if you are doing clean and jerks and snatches as part of a workout, that's great. You are training your entire body, you're training all of these muscles, but you're not training any of them specifically to failure because one of the worst things you can do in Olympic lifting is fail. When you do fail in Olympic lifting, it's technically, you fail something technically, not because your muscle itself was at the point of exhaustion. So you're just leaving a little bit of gains on the table when it comes to maximizing your physique in that way. And then I think another consideration would just be the total systemic fatigue associated. And that's like, how we discussed the reason why both you and I kind of felt this pull to move away from CrossFit is because it just tends to beat you down physically. Your joints are stressed because of the dynamic movement. There's much stricter and slower movements when you're doing bodybuilding style training. you're not laying on the ground panting like you're dying at the end of workouts. In fact, one of the features of bodybuilding or physique style training in my mind is that you can finish a workout and basically just go on with your day. In CrossFit, I very clearly remember, you'd finish a hard workout and you'd have to lay on the ground for 3 minutes, then sit on the ground for 10, then walk around with like your head like a chicken cut off for like 10 more minutes. And then you'd sit down for 10. And then you'd be like, okay, maybe I can focus on some work now. And so it's in a complete inefficient way of spending your time. And what I've found is that when people switch over to this more physique style focused training, they see a lot of improvements in other aspects of their life as well.
Yeah, I can only agree with how you describe that quote unquote recovery period afterwards. And I do think that that's really quite challenging at first because when you are so used to, hey, that's a sign of a quote unquote good workout because you're so defeated on the ground. And then suddenly you ch change to that more aesthetic focus and you finish your workout and you're like, that's it? Uh,
Mhm.
did I do enough? Should I do something extra? Like maybe do another 5K row or like something? Is this actually sufficient to elicit any kind of adaptation? It takes a while for the mind to catch up to that. I don't know if you hear the same from other people.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's where hybrid training can be beautiful because then you can kind of separate your cardio and your weights into these separate buckets, and you can control the systemic fatigue much better through modifying the intensities of the cardio that you're doing, putting lower intensity sessions around certain weightlifting and saving your higher intensity sessions for different times. And so you still get that feeling of being on the ground feeling like you're going to die, but it's much more structured in a manner that's going to allow you to actually progress in either endeavor as opposed to just pursuing feeling like crap at the end.
Yeah, so that's a great transition. Let's go into the hybrid program. I'm interested to hear, number one, what inspired you to now pursue a little bit more hybrid training for the time being. And then second part to my question is how can well, like what kind of mechanisms are there so that we can do both and progress in both? Because a lot of the audience has a passion for endurance type sports and they perhaps just started strength training because they know it's good for them or they should and so on and so often they kind of struggle with yeah, embracing both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that your audience is more endurance based or more weightlifting based or kind of evenly split?
Probably evenly split, although the endurance people usually they love endurance and they would rather just do that and they're
Mm-hmm.
only like kind of incorporating the strength because they have heard of the benefits or they know that it's more beneficial for building their physique as well.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, so for me, I'm 42 years old. As I was approaching 40, I had like some sort of weird, I don't know if you want to call it like a midlife crisis is a terrible word because it only lasted for a day, but I literally was like sitting there in a hot tub by myself in my like almost 40 years old, and I was just thinking about life as this upside down U curve where I like spent the first 40 years of my life climbing to the top of this U curve or this mountain, and then oh shit, I'm 40 now. There's like the rest of life and like everything's downhill from here in like a bad way, like not downhill like yay it's downhill, it's like oh shit it's downhill. And so on the precipice of this feeling on this day, I just decided that I needed to improve my longevity. And that was the initial reason that I got into cardio. I started I'd been listening to Peter Attia over the last year, and he had talked a lot about the importance of cardiovascular training in longevity and in health and in monitoring different blood markers and stuff like that. Um, and at the same time, I'd spent the first 40 years of my life, I guess, being mostly a mouth breather. Like, at least I didn't try to purposefully breathe through my nose. It was just like, it was never a thought of mine. I just was like, I'll breathe however I feel like I should breathe. And for me, it turned out to be mouth breathing. And so at that moment, I also decided to start mouth taping at night, which I considered to be a good first step to, at least if I can get 8 hours a night of nasal breathing, then at least that's improvement over what I was doing. And so that was like one step, and then adding in the cardio was another step. And then I progressed to starting to do nasal only cardio. And really quickly, this journey turned from pursuing health by doing cardio to, oh shit, I'm getting newbie gains again. And that is like the most inspiring, amazing thing that you can ever experience as an athlete, that someone who's been lifting weights for 24 years at that point. I was training months to add like one rep to a movement or something like that. Cardio is this completely new. It was like my eyes were opened, and every time I did it, I got better. And then it was every month I did it, I got better. And like now I'm 3 years into this thing, and still like every month or two, I'm like, wait, that was cool. I just beat that time by like 45 seconds. What? Like it was just these crazy, and I'm still experiencing it. And so I completely relate to your audience who's like, I just want to do the cardio. Like there's something about cardio that makes you feel amazing in a way that weights doesn't. And like weights make you feel amazing too. And they're so good for you in so many aspects. But cardio does give you all those feels. So I want to answer your question too about how we can combine them and stuff like that. But I'll let you jump in if you have anything to add before that.
For sure, it makes me think of a post that I saw on your Instagram just recently, also where I think you said some of the benefits of cardio, or one of the great things of cardio, is also mentally that you can kind of like zone out and at the same time stay in a homeostatic kind of state, or yeah, it's like it's not so, at least of course it depends on the intensity. If you're doing hard out sprints at whatever, you're going to be thinking of something else than if you are going at 70% of your VO2 max.
Mhm.
But no, I love that thought of like newbie gains, and I think so many people get that when they go for a run, or a first run in a long time, and they suddenly feel like, oh, I can run a marathon, and then they sign up, and like something about that makes you inspired when you do something hard and you get through it, and
Mhm.
then you progress reasonably quickly, especially for someone who has been training for such a long time. So it makes complete sense, and I love how that motivated you to train again.
Yeah, for sure. It's been great. And I really like at this point now, 3 years later, I've curated my training in a manner that allows me to kind of focus on cardio as like my 1A, but never truly giving up lifting or making it like a number two. It's not like second, it's just like a 1B sort of thing. And so this kind of goes perfectly into the next part of the conversation where you were asking about, how do we combine these two without creating conflict, with allowing them both to shine. And I'll use myself and my anecdote as like a lesson here to start this, because that first year when I got so obsessed with it, I was trying to bike 6 times a week and I was trying to lift 5 times a week. So I'm talking about 11 distinct training sessions over the course of a 7-day week, which means I had like 3 or 4 days a week where I was doing double days. And and I burn out at about the 3 month point. I really just I hit a wall and I stopped progressing in both, and I stopped enjoying both. And I could have told you that that was a bad decision from the beginning, but I've always had to kind of learn the hard way, or learn my way. I have to kind of experience it for myself and know where that limit is. And I think that's actually relatable in like the volume research now when we see this in training, where people are like, oh, well, if 40 sets are good, 50 sets is better. And there's a 52 set study, and people just need to push the limit and find where their boundary is. And I had to do the same thing with my cardio and weightlifting journey, quickly realizing that it wasn't sustainable. And so, toward the end of that year, 2 years ago, I switched my training to 2 times a week. I did one full body day and one upper body day. So I was only hitting legs like basically half of a day. And suddenly my cardio just went like through the roof. It started progressing again because I was dropping so much fatigue that was being caused by the weights. And then when I got to the next year of training, after I always take like kind of the winter and early spring off where it's really cold and snowy. So I'll take like 4 or 5 months off. And then as I started the next year, I knew immediately that there was no way I could do what I did the prior year. So I immediately went into the year with 2 to 3 times a week of weight training and 4 to 5 times a week of cardio, which meant that I really didn't have to do any double days. I wasn't really taking rest days, but that's where you get into the manipulation of the intensity for the cardio. And I think that that's really the most critical aspect when it comes to doing hybrid programming is managing the intensity of your cardio days. And this is where the beauty of zone two shines. Zone two being the zone where you can nasal breathe, have a conversation, you're doing it, but it doesn't feel that hard. You generally want to stop because you're bored, not because it's hard. And zone two is just the thing that I think has contributed the most to allowing hybrid training to be effective, but also to increasing my own conditioning. Because when you look at the volume research in weight training, there does seem to be a trend that more volume is better. And there arguably is a point where it gets worse. That the relationship is stronger even in cardio. Like the more you do, the better adaptations you get. The problem is that you just can't do that much intense cardio. What I've found through myself, through reading research, through talking to others, is that generally 2 cardio sessions that are above zone two in a week seems to be the max that most people can benefit from. Doing 3 seems to give you similar benefit, but some people see worse. So 2 sessions is really that sweet spot. And when I say cardio above zone two, this is really any cardio where you're out of breath and it feels hard.
Mhm.
So this could be like you're doing 15 to 20 minute zone three intervals. It could be 1 minute VO2 max intervals. It spans the spectrum of any type of intensity above zone two. And then zone two is just beautiful because you can fit it in the gaps so that you can get more volume of training, but it's volume of training that has a much, much lower fatigue cost. And so that's, I mean, we can dig into the specifics of program design and stuff like that, but I would say that's a pretty good general overview of the idea.
Really cool. Well, I first of all, I love that you have found a training volume that works for you. And second of all, I love that you mentioned the intensity part because I do think for some people that are completely new to endurance training, I think Dr. Peter Attia actually mentions this. For some of them, even walking is a form of
Yeah.
this one too. So it really depends where someone is at. Of course, on the other side, if someone is coming from an endurance background, it might be more of the, okay, how can we distribute the intensity properly? So I would love to get actually into the specifics, as you were saying, and some of the things that I have heard are of course, there's no one method. There's several ways to go about this, but perhaps having, yeah, as you said, like a couple of sessions of the zone two, and then maybe something that's like really, really at 90% or above, like full out for 30 seconds or for a minute or for however long, and then maybe another session where you're kind of somewhere in between that, where it might be, 4 minutes on and then a rest or so. But yeah, maybe you can give us some examples of either one of your training programs or even
Mhm.
of what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, the great introduction. I think how what you do with those intensity days likely has to do with what your objective is. So is your objective health? Is your objective like targeting a race? Like I want to race a 5K run. The way that you use those intensity days, if you're targeting a 5K versus a marathon, is very different. And so like somebody targeting a 5K, I mean, that's still very aerobic.
Mhm.
So even in that case, I'd probably wouldn't have a lot of those intensity days be like 30 seconds or 1 minute of work at a time, unless it's done in an aerobic manner. So I should probably backtrack and clarify that you can do 30 to 1 minute intervals, but you would need your rest time to be less than your work time. So we're talking like 30 or 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off. And that's kind of what you're doing on repeat. So those intervals, in a sense, are aerobic. Whereas if you were having a workout where your rest time was longer than your work time, so think 30 seconds on, 1.5 minutes off, something like that. Now we're working anaerobic energy systems, and these aren't going to contribute so much to your 5K or at all really to your marathon. Those are the types of intervals that you would do if you were training for a 400-meter all out, like a 1 minute, 1.5 minute event, something along those lines. So I think what your event is and what your objective is dictates how you structure those non-zone two days. But I think as far as like if we're taking a program that's 4 times a week of cardio, which I think is pretty standard, 2 of those sessions need to be zone two. How long those zone two sessions are going to depend on the length of your event that you're targeting. If you're just targeting zone two for health, then 45 to 60 minutes, golden, you're good to go. For me, I was targeting a 50-mile bike race when I was training, and 50 miles on gravel was around 3 hours. I was estimating it around 3 hours plus or minus a little bit. And so I needed some of those zone two rides that I was doing to be 2 to 3 hours. I need to show my body that I can extend out the duration of my rides. I don't have to do 2 to 3 hours at intensity like I would be when I'm racing, but I do need to be able to demonstrate that I can do that volume. So a lot of my zone two rides were between 90 minutes and 2.5 hours. And that just is the unfortunate time commitment of endurance work when your objective is a race versus being health. So health, 45 to 60 minutes, good to go. Race, you have to kind of cater your zone two work to the distance of your race that you're doing. The intensity stuff. So if we assume that we're doing something that's at least, say, running a 5K, so at least 20 to 30 minutes in length, up to, say, 2 hours in length, the way that I would structure those intensity days would be to have one that is more of that zone three, low zone four. So we're talking 10 to 20 minutes of intervals, but we're only going to be resting for maybe 2 to 4 minutes between each interval. So they're very aerobic. It's probably a pace that you could sustain for an hour if you had to, but you're going to break it up into these really manageable 10 to 15-minute chunks with short rests in between. So I think, 3 to 5 intervals there, depending on the length, is usually pretty good. My general view is that if you're in that zone three, zone four range, that you want to target approximately 40 minutes in zone. So for me, that might mean that I have to do an hour and a half long ride to get 45 minutes of that to be in the zone three, zone four range. Because some of it's going downhill, some of it's flat. So you're really only getting in that range when you're maybe going uphill. It depends on your fitness level, of course. So that would be one set of intensity. And then the other set of intensity would be more on the VO2 max spectrum. And so this generally works in a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. So this could be 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, could be a minute on, minute off, could be 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off. Usually for VO2 max work, you don't go above 5 or 6 minutes at a time. So it's usually about your mile pace. Like if you were to go out and just run a mile as fast as you could, that's usually about your VO2 max pace. But instead of doing that in 6 to 8 minutes or whatever it takes you to run a mile, you would break that up into like 3 minute intervals, 4 minute intervals, something like that, where you're working really, really hard, but you're also able to recover sufficiently so that you can work really, really hard again. And that's kind of that more like that 4x4 that you mentioned, the Norwegian 4x4, which is super popular, which is 4 rounds of 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off. So you're getting about 16 minutes in zone, but that 16 minutes in zone is a much higher zone than the 40 minutes in zone that you're trying to get in the other workout. And I think that's a pretty good structure to kind of get you going. And obviously, the way that you put your weight workouts around that is also quite important.
Yeah, thank you for laying that out that way. And I think it makes complete sense to adapt the duration and intensity to your objective. And yeah, I mean, given, or let's say for most people, the objective, or at least one of the objectives, is probably longevity. I'm interested to hear your, well, first of all, your opinion, but also what you hear from your clients, because I get a lot of people, or a lot of women in particular, that do some endurance work, but it's all sort of in that moderate space. Like they only just now, I feel like we're hearing more about the benefits of the high intensity for Gen Pop. I believe go back several couple of decades or so, it was probably more like, oh, that's for a sprinter, or that's for blah, 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 blah. And now it's more like, well, anybody, even the menopausal woman at 55 years old, can benefit from doing really high intensity work for a few seconds on and a few seconds off. Is that something that you see as well, or that you program for Gen Pop as well, even if they're just with a longevity focus?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that it's important to take your heart rate into all the different zones. Like you should be able to do a low sustainable heart rate for 1 to 2 hours. I mean, you should be able to walk for 6 hours. Like you should be able to go out and just take a walk for the whole day if you need to. You should be able to do something in zone two for 1 or 2 hours. Like you should be able to make sure your heart rate can do that. And you should push your heart rate into the extreme zones. And there really is no danger in that. I mean, unless you have susceptible to certain heart conditions, et cetera. Obviously check with your doctor. But for the majority of people, taking your heart rate up into zone five or to close to your maximum heart rate is super healthy and really good for you, and definitely going to contribute to a lot of the longevity pieces. I mean, Dr. Rhonda Patrick even went through a period where she didn't even do any zone two for a while because she was so convinced by the literature on Tabata and high intensity interval work that she just was doing intervals like 3 or 4 times a week. And then I think Peter Attia finally got into her head that, hey, it's important. You got to do zone two as well. But yeah, your heart rate should be able to do all sorts of different things. You should be able to sit in a sauna that's hot. You should be able to go in a cold bath that's cold. And you should be able to kind of just, live life in a productive manner, regardless of what circumstances are thrown at you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your perspective, and I think that's a nice explanation on that as well. And I've got two questions on some of the things that you said previously. So number one, with all that shift in your training, have you lost some muscle mass? I guess I'll leave that first question there.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is I truly don't know. My guess, my assumption is that I haven't. And this is why, because I haven't lost weight. And so when you look at the mechanisms of physiology, because I'm doing a lot of cardio, is my body just going to be like, oh, he's doing cardio, we should drop muscle? Or is the weightlifting that I'm doing where I'm maintaining my strength, I'm not losing strength in the gym, and I am not losing body weight? So where would the muscle go? Like, am I just going to turn muscle into fat because I'm doing cardio? That kind of seems counterintuitive as well, especially since most people use cardio to lose fat. So mechanistically, there potentially is something happening inside of me. Like cardiovascular endurance work is by nature slow twitch muscular activity. And thus, there might be some conversions of my fast twitch muscle fiber into slow twitch muscle fiber, which would make it more enduring and make it better at doing cardiovascular exercise. That's certainly possible. Um, I don't know that that necessarily leads to a complete loss of muscle mass versus just a change of fiber type in a small way.
Well, I think the literature does show quite nicely that we really don't need that much strength training volume in order to maintain our muscle mass, which
Right.
is wonderful news, I think. Nonetheless, I have read several studies, or I don't know if you're familiar with Ross Edgley and his endeavors in terms of hybrid training, but
Uh,
he is somebody who I think he swam around
oh, I
the
know the swimming guy, the guy who did the English Channel or whatever. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, exactly. And
yeah,
so I think he swam for 186 days straight, like 12 hours
yeah.
on, 12 hours off. And of course, as we both know, weight loss is largely also influenced by nutrition. And so he ate a ton of food, and he actually gained like something like 10 kilos or something like that. And a large amount of that was body fat, actually. So
Yeah, because he gained weight. Because he
yeah,
gained
yeah.
weight. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. But if
exactly.
your weight's stable, it'd be hard to make that argument. Yeah, for sure. That's
Absolutely.
crazy though. Yeah. You can gain weight while swimming 12 hours a day. That's insane. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I mean, he also, of course, didn't do any strength training. So
Right.
yes.
Right.
Yeah, my second question was in relation to what you said about nose breathing. And I
Mm.
just want to highlight that because I don't think many people are aware of the importance of nose breathing, particularly during things like zone two cardio or just in day-to-day life. I assume that when you go into these really high intensities, you probably switch into mouth
Mm.
and nose, or perhaps at least at some point. But maybe you can highlight why that's important.
Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert on this. I really only know what I've learned through listening to people like James Nestor, who wrote Breathe or Breath, however you want to pronounce that, and other podcasts associated. Patrick McCown is a great guy as well. Um, from my understanding, it is that when you breathe through your nose, you're able to filter out the more dangerous things in our atmosphere that could be going in directly into your body. So when you breathe it in through your mouth, it's just going straight into your body. When you take it in through your nose, you have those little nose hairs. It kind of filters out some of the bad stuff and leaves you with more pure kind of oxygen that you can use for your body. Um, I've also noticed that the more that I breathe through my nose, the better I get at breathing through my nose. And that seems obvious maybe, but like if it's feeling clogged and I go out for a zone 2 ride where I focus on breathing through my nose, I come back and it's almost always clear going forward from there. So there certainly seems to be some anecdotal value there too. I mean, also like we have noses. And so like if we were meant to breathe through our mouth, it would seem that like the nose would be irrelevant. We have two ways that we can breathe, so we should probably use both of them. Makes sense to me. And yeah, so I don't know. I guess that's really my whole education on the topic.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the point on the oxygen in the air that we're breathing in, that's probably one of the biggest one. And from to my knowledge, like also, if you're breathing through your mouth most of the day, you're probably also going to breathe through your mouth at night. That might
Mhm.
lead to snoring, that might lead to sleep apnea,
Yeah.
etc. And then you're not recovering as well throughout the night. And like, I think it's a whole cascade. And another book that I have read on the topic is called Jaws. I forget who it's by, but yeah, so that actually shows that if we continuously breathe through our mouth, it also actually alters something in terms of just the whole structure of our jaw.
Yeah.
So yeah, I believe that really trying to breathe through our nose when we can, and you can exhale through your mouth and also
Mhm.
affect your parasympathetic nervous system that way and kind of calm yourself down more as opposed to just breathing through your mouth. I
Mhm.
think that's a really great thing to focus on or to at least pay attention to.
Yeah, I
um,
actually really glad you brought up the parasympathetic piece because that's one of the huge advantages that I've found personally as well with the nasal breathing is anytime that I'm like, man, I'm sure we've all experienced this where you're working on your computer and you feel like you're just like on 1,000 milligrams of Adderall, even though you're not, and you're just like punching the keys, probably blood pressure like through the roof, you know? And then suddenly I realize that I'm just breathing through my mouth and like this whole thing, like everything's converging and it's really bad. So I'll like close my computer, shut my eyes, take like 10 really deep nasal breaths in, and complete change of total body awareness and sense of calm. So there's absolutely something to that as well.
Yeah, it really is so interesting how we can affect our whole state so much through our breath. Yeah, I
Yeah.
want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something again also that I saw on your Instagram. I will definitely link your account in the show notes because I think it's super helpful also in terms of your exercise execution. But you mentioned a one arm experiment on there, and I would love to know how it came to that and what that actually entailed.
Yeah, I love doing these experiments as somebody that's this deep into the training game, you know, it's not like I'm making really fast results in the gym anymore. And so what do I have to lose was kind of my thought process going into it. And so the way that the experiment was structured was that I was going to do 6 months of training only my left arm with direct exercises. So you're talking bicep curls, tricep extensions, push downs, like anything like that would only be done with my left arm. But I would continue training my right arm through bilateral compound movements. So, pull downs, bench presses, overhead presses, things like that. I'd still use both arms. So it's only the direct work that I'd be using my left arm. And my left arm is notoriously my weaker arm. It's not just weaker as far as the amount of reps that I could perform at a given weight. It's usually 1 to 2 reps weaker on like a 10 rep set. Um, but it also is smaller. So when I would measure them or look at DEXA scans or anything like that, it would be about half a pound of muscle less than my right arm. I'm right arm dominant, so it makes sense. Throughout the experiment, um, there were a few like weird moments. Like every time that I would do an arm day where I was only training my left arm, my whole like upper traps, rhomboid delt area on my left side would feel like really tight for the next few hours afterwards, whereas my right side was like completely untrained. It was just kind of a weird feeling. And over time, I ended up getting more chronic tightness kind of in that like mid trap area, which was a little bit unfortunate, but fine. Um, and as far as the results at the end, I did do DEXA scans, and for reasons we may or may not discuss, I'm less bullish on the accuracy of DEXA scans now. But when I did this, I was in full trust of it. I had no bad experiences at this point. It ended up turning out that my right arm actually grew a little bit more than my left, and I was very surprised by that. So that was as far as according to the DEXA, my right arm had grown slightly more than my left. Um, on top of that, when I did the measurements, it looked like both arms had grown. So it looked like I had gained a little less than a quarter inch on my left, but also a little less than a quarter inch on my right, despite not training my right at all. And then as far as strength, I was able to equal the strength when I did my strength tests at the end between right and left arm. But we have to keep in mind that I had been training only my left arm in these movement patterns. So neurally, like skill wise, my left arm was very trained on these movements, and my right arm was like fish out of water trying to figure out what to do, very uncoordinated, unexpectedly. And so with all of that in mind, I was able to equal my strength between my two arms. But as soon as I went back to training both arms again normally, within like 2 weeks, I was right back to having a 1 or 2 rep discrepancy between my right and left arm again. So those are the results. And my conclusion is both basically that I got even more nihilistic when it came to whether training actually elicits any changes at all. Because in my mind, I'm like, I've been doing between like 10 and 15 direct sets of arm work on my left arm only for the last 6 months and not training my right arm at all, except from compound movements. And yet there was either no change or my right arm even grew slightly more. And so to me, it basically tells me that either I personally am at a point in my training journey where I'm not gaining results anymore, or that for most people, maybe compound movements are sufficient to get you the majority of your arm growth, and we don't need to spend a ton of time doing isolation movements. I mean, there's a number of ways you could interpret it, but those would be my two main interpretations.
Yeah, super, super interesting. I mean, it would have been brilliant to have two people with you perform the experiment, someone who perhaps has been training for like 3, 4 years and someone who's
Mhm.
like a complete newbie.
Absolutely. That would have been a great study design. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so just to kind of get the comparison. But I am intrigued as to why that made you dubious about the DEXA scan, which is somewhat considered a gold standard, if we want to say so.
Yeah, so it wasn't this specific one that made me dubious of it. It was that I went back a year later to do another DEXA scan, and my body weight was the same as it was at the prior DEXA scan, within 1 pound or less. And I felt going into the DEXA scan that I looked similar. I was at the same body weight, and my performance in the gym was as good or better than it was at the prior time. So I went into this DEXA scan being like, cool, let's just see what happens. Well, the DEXA scan came back and told me that I had gained 12 pounds of fat and lost 10 pounds of muscle, or 11 pounds of muscle, to make up for that 1 pound difference in body weight. I'd gained 12 pounds of fat and lost 11 pounds of muscle, and my body fat had gone up from 14% to 21%. And that all happened within a year, apparently. And so that made me extremely dubious of the DEXA scan. I posted pictures. I put it on my Instagram page. There's a whole post about my DEXA experience on there as well. And there was a lot of outreach from the community. Like even Greg Knuckles and some other people reached out to me and were telling me about like why this could have happened. Like there's calibration issues with DEXA scans. So like I made sure my nutrition and my training and my electrolytes and my water intake were all the same DEXA to DEXA. But they were saying despite that, the DEXA itself is calibrated to either a classic or an NHANES model. And Greg Knuckles told me that apparently a lot of these DEXA scans have been recently recalibrated from classic to NHANES, and that NHANES tends to estimate you 5% higher body fat than classic, which explains the like 20% to 14% or whatever, and the crazy discrepancy in muscle loss and whatever. And so I don't know if I'm so dubious of DEXAs in general, but I'm for sure skeptical of the fact that they would recalibrate a machine. Like, how can I expect any consistency in my readings if I'm going to the same machine with the same tech at the same time and the same nutrition? Like, I should expect the same results. And it was a bit of a letdown, I guess, to get the result that I did.
Yeah, I'm flabbergasted. Like honestly, that is insane because 14 to 21% difference, it's not like we're talking about 1 or 2% or any,
Right.
that's a substantial amount. And I have never been able to do a DEXA here in Colombia or wherever I have lived before. There are no DEXA scans. So here the closest thing to that is the in-body, which I
Mm-hmm.
am not a fan of at
No.
all because honestly, I've experimented with it before also, and just like from day to day,
Yeah.
taken several, and it was like 4 or 5%, just depending on I don't even know, but also it's absolutely. I think people should just, as you said, like rely on what they see in the mirror as well. Take pictures, maybe measurements. If you know someone who does who takes good calipers or whatever, that might be a good
Yeah.
alternative.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not a big fan of those at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a newbie and you're just like, I want to see how much muscle I can gain in 3 years, and you take one at day one and one at year three, like the DEXA is probably going to be able to pick up whether you gain muscle during that period of time or not. And the DEXA also has value for bone density. It's extremely accurate apparently for bone density, so that's great for anybody that's worried about sarcopenia or anything like that. But um, but yeah, I agree with you completely. The in body is trash.
Well, Bryan, I want to make sure I'm respecting your time. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us. I think it's really, really helpful, particularly in regards to the hybrid training. And I am going to encourage everybody to go and check out your Evolve training program as well as the Paragon performance methods, because I do think they're such smartly designed programs. And with all that, the ocean of mediocre programming out there, I think more people need to see it. So thank you for all that you do, and it's been a true pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This was great. Great talking to you. Thank you.